Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia and one of the greatest female monarchs in European history. She also was a descendant of the Maria branch, as was Queen Victoria. And it is through Queen Victoria and her sister that the remaining members of the House of Garsenda descend, including those who still reign today. Victoria's mother, also named Victoria, was actually married twice. Thus, Queen Victoria actually had an elder half-sister named Feodora. It is through Feodora's branch that the current King of Sweden descends, matrilineally, of course, as well as the current King of Spain, Philip VI, and Constantine II, the last King of Greece. Through Queen Victoria herself, we get several more interesting members of the House of Garsenda from more recent history. Her eldest daughter, also named Victoria, married a German Kaiser, and hence that makes Wilhelm II, Kaiser during World War I, a member of the House of Garsenda as well. His sister Sophia married the King of Greece, and therefore several more Greek kings are members too, as well as Michael I, the final king of Romania. Finally, through Queen Victoria's daughter Alice, we get Alexandra, Empress Consort of Russia and wife to the final Tsar, Nicholas II. There's also another Queen Consort of Sweden, and last but not least, the current royal consort of the United Kingdom, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh and husband to Queen Elizabeth. So, as we've seen, this one matrilineal dynasty has had a tremendous impact on the history of Europe. But strangely, it has never been properly recognized or even really talked about until now. If it were to be measured alongside patrilineal dynasties, like the House of Habsburg or the House of Capet, it would obviously rank above them as the most influential of all time. Just look at how many thrones it has set upon, and for how many years. Whenever a European nation was at its peak of power, a member of the House of Garsenda was there. And this video has only scratched the surface. If you would like to study this incredible royal house in greater detail, I'll leave a link to a PDF version of the chart in the description so that you can download it for free. If you notice any mistakes or branches that I've missed, let me know and I'll do my best to update it as time goes on. Thanks for watching.
Подъем. Вот вклад, который открыл Влад. И договор, что в шкатулке хранится, в темном шкафу и в чулане томится, пока Влад его ищет и злится.
Где этот договор?
Открой вклад в Сбербанк онлайн, ставка выше, и договор всегда будет под рукой.
Так даже надежнее.
А еще выгоднее и удобнее. Сбербанк онлайн.
Today I'm going to answer the question, who would be king of France if France had not abolished its monarchy? Or if, for some reason, it wanted to restore its monarchy? I'll be looking at the three main candidates for the job, as well as an additional 3 more candidates, before finally giving you my opinion on who the rightful heir is. This video is part of Project France, a multi-channel collaboration on French history. After you watch this video, be sure to check out the playlist for Project France, which I'll link to in the description. So, like I say, French monarchists today are actually divided on who the rightful monarch of France is. The 3 main factions are the Legitimists, the Orleanists, and the Bonapartists. And all 3 of these groups have histories that go back to the 19th century. But before I tell you about each candidate, let me first explain why we have 3 options and not just one. Let's go back and start with the king who ruled France when its monarchy was at its peak, Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King. He was from the royal house of Bourbon, which in turn was a branch of the house of Capet, which had ruled France since the year 987. Louis XIV was predeceased by both his son, Le Grand Dauphin, and his eldest grandson, Le Petit Dauphin. And therefore the next king of France was his great-grandson, who became Louis XV. Note that the word Dauphin means dolphin in French, and was a title given to the heir to the throne, kind of like the title Prince of Wales in England. More importantly, I want you to note that Louis XV had an uncle named Philippe, more important to the heir to the throne, kind of like the title Prince of Wales in England. More importantly, I want you to note that Louis XV had an uncle named Philippe, who became the King of Spain. I won't go into the reasons for that in this video, but it has to do with a major European conflict known as the War of the Spanish Succession. So at this point, the House of Bourbon split in 2. There was the senior branch in France, shown here in blue, but there was also the junior branch in Spain, shown here in red. Let's look at the main branch first. Louis XV was followed by his grandson, Louis XVI. Louis XVI was the king who married Marie Antoinette, and they were the king and queen who lost their heads during the French Revolution. At that point, France became a republic for a while, until this guy over here, Napoleon Bonaparte, became emperor and conquered most of Europe. But, as you probably know, the other European powers joined together to defeat Napoleon, and eventually France decided to invite back the House of Bourbon. Louis XVI's son, Louis XVII, died in prison as a child during the Revolution, so the next available person for the job of king was Louis XVI's brother, who became Louis XVIII. Yes, there are a lot of kings named Louis in French history. I should point out that during the 19th century, many people came forward claiming to be the true Louis XVII, stating that the child who died in prison was a decoy. So for many years there was some doubt over this issue. However, because of modern DNA testing, we now know for certain that the child who died in prison was in fact Louis XVII. So there's no possible claimants from this line here. Louis XVIII did not have any heirs, so when he died, the throne passed to a third brother, Charles X. But in 1830, there was another French Revolution. This time, the French didn't want to get rid of the monarchy. They just wanted to have a different kind of monarchy, a more liberal one, controlled by the people. So Charles X was given the boot and replaced by Louis Philippe from the House of Orléans. Note that Louis Philippe took the title King of the French instead of King of France. Actually, as the story goes, when Charles X abdicated, his eldest son became Louis XIX for about 20 minutes, until he too abdicated. The next person in line was then the Count of Chambord, who was technically king for about a week, until everyone agreed that the transfer to the House of Orléans was legit. There were, however, people who continued to support the House of Bourbon, and these folks became known as the Legitimists, and contrasted with those who supported the new king, who were known as Orleanists. The House of Orléans traces its line to Louis XIV's brother Philippe, So they are, in fact, a junior branch of the House of Bourbon and direct male line descendants of the original House of Capet. But in 1848, there was a third major French Revolution. Yes, the French in those days were really into having revolutions. This time, they gave the king the boot and established another republic, making Napoleon's nephew the president. But guess what? History repeated itself. The republic soon became an empire, and the nephew of Napoleon I became Napoleon III. What about Napoleon II, you ask? Well, Napoleon II was the son of Napoleon I, who kind of ruled for 2 weeks. But he later died without any children, and thus the direct line from the original Napoleon died with him. Let's fast forward to 1870 when...
Да наоборот. Да, они все равно ничего не дадут, не дают. Поверим. Эй!
Liebe Anlegerinnen, liebe Anleger, ich muss Ihnen etwas gestehen. Ja,
Okay, so OnePlus have just announced an affordable $400 phone, and your gut reaction to this news is probably, why do I care? Because it's fair to say that the vast majority of $400 phones aren't particularly exciting. But over the last month, OnePlus have been teasing details of this phone at an achingly slow pace, one spec at a time, acting as if they were about to reveal God's gift to mankind, not a mid-range smartphone. But here's the thing, it worked. They've created more buzz than I've ever seen for a product like this, so much that they've managed to completely sell out 3 separate waves of blind pre-orders. That is, people who've effectively paid to book the device before they even know what it is. It's crazy talk. So the question on my mind, now that we actually have the device, is this special, or is this just really clever marketing for an average mid-range product? So this is the reviewer's kit. Nice hefty package. Then if we slip it open, it's pretty simple. 3 official cases. We've got a black sandstone, a blue sandstone, and clear. And that leaves us with the retail box, what you would get if you went into a store and bought a OnePlus Nord. This is a fancy box, especially for a category of phones that most companies don't put a lot of thought into. There's at least some soul in this. The first thing on the inside is the OnePlus Nord itself, and below that your insert with a welcome letter, a further insert with some manuals and stickers, and a pretty wacky looking case. And then right at the bottom, a USB-C charging cable and a Warp Charge 30T adapter. It would have been cool to see these in the new blue and black colour theme too, but hey ho. And here's the phone. Okay, so we get it. It's got fancy packaging, but what about the phone itself? Is this actually special? Honestly, I think it is. And it actually only takes a very quick side-by-side versus a competing Android phone to see why. Take the Oppo Find X2 Lite. It's probably the most similar phone to this on a hardware level. Both have a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main. The most similar phone to this on a hardware level. Both have a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera. Both have an upper mid-range Snapdragon 765G chipset, and actually both have a 6.4-inch display with an identical 2400 by 1080p resolution. But to be really honest, I think OnePlus Nord demolishes the Oppo for 2 reasons. First of all, that I think OnePlus has picked the right components, and secondly, that OnePlus has really thought about the user. So, what do I mean by that? Well, the reason why $400 phones are often not particularly exciting is because for this price, companies can't afford to build exclusive technologies for them. The way these phones are made are literally by looking at all the parts available and choosing. I'll have that display for $50, I'll have that camera for $30, I'll have that battery for an extra $10, and so on. So almost every one of these mid-ranges is just a different cocktail made with the same selection of ingredients. And the Nord is no different. Pretty much every part you see on this phone, we've seen somewhere else before. But OnePlus has made good choices. That's to say that in pretty much every category, they've picked about as good a component as you can get for the price. These displays have the same resolution, yes, but this one has a smaller board around it, and a hole-punch camera that's a little less intrusive than that notch. They both have the same chipset, yes, but because of the 90Hz screen refresh rate on the Nord, it feels faster. Oppo has a single front camera, OnePlus has dual front cameras, one of them a normal wide-angle lens and the second an ultra-wide angle. The Nord has 5G, it has a big battery, it has an in-display fingerprint scanner, plenty of RAM and storage. You get the idea. Nothing feels particularly lacking, except for maybe audio. It doesn't have a headphone jack and the single speaker is not the best. But this is commonplace with mid-rangers. So for the money, you're getting components that are at least as good as the competition, in a lot of cases better. But to be really honest, I don't think that that alone is enough to justify the whole month of teasing that OnePlus gave us. Frankly, is not the best. But this is commonplace with mid-rangers. So for the money, you're getting components that are at least as good as the competition, in a lot of cases better. But to be really honest, I don't think that that alone is enough to justify the whole month of teasing that OnePlus gave us. Thankfully though, there is something else. It's the fact that you feel as a user that OnePlus has really kind of thought about what you want. And this sounds kind of self-explanatory. I mean, every company wants to make the best phone for their users, but you really get the impression when you're using this that OnePlus haven't just tried to fill out a spec sheet like most mid-rangers do. They've just tried to make a phone that's good. And the way you can tell is that there's a whole number of things going on here that aren't immediately obvious until you've bought the phone. Like the fact that they've added seals around the openings to protect against splashes. They've made software that's, in my opinion, more inviting than a lot of the competition. See, I actually like Oppo's phone. Like the fact that they've added seals around the openings to protect against splashes. They've made software that's, in my opinion, more inviting than a lot of the competition. Really obvious until you've bought the phone. Like the fact that they've added seals around the openings to protect against splashes. They've made software that's, in my opinion, more inviting than a lot of the competition. See, I actually like Oppo's Color OS. I think it gives you great granular control. But if I had to guess, I would say that 90% of users, especially here in the West, would prefer OnePlus's solution. It's not perfect, but they've managed to make a software skin that feels quite burdenless. Visually simple, but with all the core features still there. And then for cameras, they've added optical image stabilization, which I don't remember the last time I've actually seen this on a $400 phone, because of this whole fact that it doesn't really show up on a spec sheet. But when you're using the phone, you feel it. It makes a big difference to the quality of the camera experience. But I actually do just want to talk to you about this for a second, because OnePlus is selling this as a flagship camera, and that's only just about passable as maybe being technically true. Yes, this has the same main camera as the flagship OnePlus 8, which sounds brilliant, but do remember that this was also the same sensor as the one in the OnePlus 7 last year. And the fact that the three other cameras here, the 8-megapixel ultra-wide, the 2-megapixel macro, and the 5-megapixel depth cameras, are not high-end sensors. There are good macro cameras out there, but this is not one of them. That said, while calling this a flagship camera is a bit of a push, for $400 you will struggle to find better. By using a camera sensor that OnePlus is already very familiar with, this comes out the box with a whole year's worth of refinements and tweaking. And the result is a camera that has polish. It's pretty similar to what Apple did with the latest iPhone SE. They basically re-released the iPhone 8's camera from a few years ago with more advanced, up-to-date image processing, which as a concept might sound like you're actually getting cheated a little bit, but in the end, the results were good, and you were getting that technology at a lower price than you'd ever had before. Like the Nord. This camera doesn't feel cutting edge. I'm not blown away by the clarity, but because of the refinement, it's reliable. It handles dynamic range consistently well. It gets good colors, and OnePlus has fixed the overly red-looking video that their older phones used to produce. This isn't a full review. This camera doesn't feel cutting edge. I'm not blown away by the clarity, but because of the refinement, it's reliable. It handles dynamic range consistently well. It gets good colors, and OnePlus has fixed the overly red-looking video that their older phones used to produce. This isn't a full review. I've only had the phone for a week, but it's enough time for my solid first impression. And even the front camera is one of the better ones out there. It deals well with harsh backlighting, and given that it is a 32-megapixel sensor, it's pretty detailed too. And I would consider the ultra-wide icing on the cake. It is a good option to have, but it still has some distortion and a lower quality output. The other thing I noticed is haptics, and I actually came into this ready to complain about it, because before I got my phone I was reading through the reviewer's guide, and I could see that inside the phone only has a basic linear motor, pretty much the same thing that you'll find in the Oppo. And to give you an idea of what that feels like, listen to this.
Introducing Buff, the gamer's loyalty app. It lets you earn Buff coins while playing your favorite games. All you have to do is download Buff.
Now this might not bother you, but having used flagship phones with tighter, higher quality vibrations, I can say for sure that haptics help, and they're probably the biggest giveaway for a phone that's tried to cut corners. But I was kind of surprised to see that they're actually okay here. And it's not because they've used a high-end motor, it's just that they've spent time tuning what they did have. I'm not 100% sure what they actually have done to it, whether it's just turning down the intensity, or whether there's actually more advanced tweaking going on, but the point is that as a user, it feels good. And these haptics have been subtly integrated into the software to add tactility. When you're using the navigation gestures, when you tap that shutter button on the camera, when you're using your fingerprint to unlock the phone, as well as seeing an animation, you feel something. Although, on the note of that fingerprint scanner, it's good, very few errors, and it's one of the fastest. I just wish it was higher up. It's not a particularly huge phone, so you can still manage with your thumb, but there's usually a bit of stretching involved. Compared to the flagship OnePlus phones, the Snapdragon 765G chip does introduce some limitations. I could still play COD Mobile at a smooth 60 frames per second, but on medium settings, and compared to the flagships, the slow motion video isn't as slow, just due to power limitations. So that is pretty much the Nord. But let's just come back to that original question. Is this phone special? And the way I would round this off is by saying that yes, and it's also a really clever strategic move by OnePlus. More than ever before, people are flocking to buy phones in this mid-range segment, and I think the Nord is a great answer to that. Most companies, they have like 6 different mid-range phones at any one time, and they scatter their resources and effort between them. But OnePlus is just making one phone that's targeted squarely at the middle of the mid-range market, and they've devoted all resources into just making a device that impresses people. And I say that because it's very clear that that's what OnePlus is trying to do. The Nord isn't trying to make a quick buck,